based in Bratislava. So we have 3 European capitals represented here and 3 very interesting people to talk about this subject, which is a subject that dominated the German elections to some degree. I live in Berlin. My name is Terry Martin. I'm a television news anchor and broadcast journalist, and I, of course, covered the German election. I've covered many German elections, but this German election was interesting in the sense that how we can push the green agenda through in light of the climate emergency, as it's described, while still preserving social and economic stability and prosperity for Germany. Very important. And that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about this morning. So, what we're talking about, the title, first of all, for you, so we're all on the same page, Getting the Just Transition Right for the European Green Deal. But what are we talking about when we say just transition? We're actually talking about two things. First of all, we're talking about the concept just transition. This has been around for a while. It comes from the labor movement, actually. It's still very important for the labor movement for obvious reasons. But it's 2 things. It's that, and it's also a mechanism in a European context. First, the concept. The concept is basically making sure that in the movement towards the greening of the economy, and this is everywhere, we have to make sure that no one is left behind, no region is left behind, basically. So it's about providing opportunities for regions, for businesses, for workers as they transition away from carbon-intensive activities. We're talking here, of course, about fossil fuels, coal, fossil fuel extraction and energy production, metals, cement, chemicals, all those things that produce a lot of CO2. And there are a lot of those industries around, particularly in this region. So it's of great significance to the Central and Eastern European region. It's also, so that's the first thing, the concept. And that's general. This is an important concept in the United States. It's a concept in China. It's an important issue everywhere, because if it's not done right, it can create disruption in a really negative way. Okay. So the second thing is, because we're talking about this idea of just transition in the context of the European Green Deal, and in that context, in the European Green Deal, there is something called the mechanism, the just transition mechanism. And it has 3 parts to it. First, most important part perhaps is the Just Transition Fund. Just Transition Fund provides 17.5 billion in grants. There's also a private investment scheme that's attached to it and a public sector loan facility. So it's a bit complicated, but I feel it's important to say that in the context of the European Green Deal, because that's what we're relating the idea of just transition to. So, enough of that. I would say only one more thing about that, and that is that when the Green Deal was being put together, there was initially a lot more money set aside in the proposals for the just transition. This got slashed significantly, much to the chagrin of those who, of course, were pushing for it, but this is not uncommon in a European budget round. Good. So enough of that. Enough of me. Let's bring in the 3 of you. I'd like to first start with Linda and Nadia, because the audience might not be that familiar with the institutions or the groups that you work with, the organizations. Maybe tell us a little bit about what it is you do, how you plug into the idea of a just transition, why it matters to you and your clients. Starting here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm the CEO of a new think tank. I guess after a year, I still get the pleasure to call it that. It's a Prague-based institution that focuses on technical expertise in sustainable finance topics. And one of our main work streams actually is just transition. So what we do is part research, part convening. But what we have found out through our initial research work across the region is that actually the understanding of just transition and what it requires to do it properly is still lacking. We are also lacking capacities. The just transition mechanism as such does have some capacity building built into it, and there's a variety of actors, and we're only now finalizing the pillar number 1 of just transition mechanism, which was all about grants. And what we did, we thought, well, just transition, as you correctly mentioned, is not just about the just transition mechanism or about shifting away from coal. Eventually, we will need to decarbonize all industries. So let's just remember that. And if we're going to do that, we need to get it right. We need to have a much more holistic view. And as our hosts from GLOBSEC keep reminding us, it's also about public-private partnerships, because the just transition mechanism doesn't have enough money in it. The grants are tiny to be systematically important. The second pillar, of course, has loan mechanisms and much more blending facility, but we need to figure out what are the key things that we need to invest in. And from the examples that we've looked across from all across the world, the ones that have worked best actually are public-private, but they're also national, regional, and local, and they're really big volumes of investment. So that's going to be really interesting to see how we do this, because inevitably we need to decarbonize. We are in Europe, that's not going to change. The direction of travel is clear. And I think that for us, it's really important that we look at the different tiers and the different things that need to happen. And sadly, what we have found out is that the financial literacy and actually capacities at the regional level from local actors such as municipalities and different levels of government, there isn't necessarily enough information flow and capacities to support local SMEs and projects sufficiently. So we will need much more help and much more investment, but if we get it right, I think there's huge opportunities for jobs, also for some positive impact, and to avoid what I call the second wicked problem of our time, which is inequality. Because inequality creates political volatility, it creates a lot of negative externalities that also affect our climate ambition. So I think it's not nice to have, it's a must-have, and now there's also a new term, equitable transition. So I think it's going to be a heating up topic, so I'm really glad to see it on the agenda here.
Great. What I think is very valuable, that you are here, and also that the two of you, but that we have two people from the region who are working in this region, serving the interests of this region. So, Nadia, you're in Bratislava.
Yes.
You know the region well. Tell us, the same thing about you. What does your organization do in plugging into this? How important is it for your clients and your activities? And kind of, what are you doing in terms of concrete engagement with this topic?
Okay, so our company is Energy Solutions, or energy contracting company, and this means that we want to help businesses and the governments to achieve the climate targets which were set by the Green Deal. And we have two very strong shareholders who are basically directly involved and must decarbonize themselves. So it's SPP, which is a national gas provider in Slovakia, the 100% state-owned, and ČEZ ESCO. This is the same company in Czech Republic, which was created by Big ČEZ, that has a big transition scheme, how to basically change the coal-powered electric power or power plants to the electric ones. So we basically need to see how to use the Just Transition Fund, but because it concerns SMEs mainly, this should be the tool how our customers can help, they can get a financial help basically to invest for their investments in the decarbonization. But as we said, it's a tricky scheme, so there's not too much clarity how to use it. And because the resilience and recovery facility now, it got even more complicated. So we are normally able to advise what is available on the market, which grants they can use, and we can also help them sometimes to prepare their applications for the right solutions for them. But right now, there's not much willingness on the market, or not much belief that the Just Transition Fund will help effectively to support the regions. On the other hand, what we can see in Slovakia, and initially this was supposed to support mainly the region of Horná Nitra, but now there are a lot of discussions to extend it for the whole country. to most of the regions. So if the implementation will be right and if the scheme will be right in the end, it can really help.
It sounds like there is, first of all, the confidence issue. Is there confidence in the Just Transition Fund, the mechanism to actually help? But there's also a knowledge gap. There's a learning curve when it comes to plugging into the mechanism, but also the concept of just transition as a whole. I'm just wondering, as a term, if you, I don't normally do this. I'm not a person who asks people to raise their hands and tell me what they think. But in this case, I'm really curious if each of you here in the audience would just raise your hand if you are familiar with the concept by that term, just transition, and the mechanism in the European Union. Just how many, is it on your agenda? I mean, be honest. Okay, yeah, so maybe half the room, yeah, maybe half the room here of extremely well-educated people who are plugging into the policy community and dealing, and in this region where it has some significance. Very interesting. So I want to bring you in, Beata. Jacek, we know your institution, your bank, and it's been very active, of course, in this region for a long time, as in the rest of Europe. But I'm wondering where it is on your agenda and how your bank can help, if it can help. Are there, is it something that your bank is really working on actively as a policy portfolio for your clients?
Thank you very much, Terry. Pleasure to be joining you today. So I represent the EBRD. We think of ourselves as a green bank. We've made a commitment to direct more than half of our investment towards green issues. And we work mainly with private sector. About 3/4 of our activities are or should be directed to private sector. That's the commitment we make. So we support low carbon transition, but that obviously means that we need to support just transition. So just to give you types of activities we engage in Egypt, we invested $500 million to create or in a solar park, largest solar park on the African continent. In Poland, we invested 250 million euros to support construction of a battery gigafactory. In Slovakia, we support financing of installation of buildings, municipal residential buildings. So these are things we do to support decarbonization. But of course, the flip side of that is that as you support low carbon transition, you need to worry about winners and losers. So you've already mentioned coal. In our region, coal is very prominent. More than a third of Mongolia's exports come from coal. More than 2% of total employment in Kazakhstan is in coal, 2.5% of total employment in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So a lot of times coal mining is owned by state-owned enterprises, and that in some ways makes things both easier and more difficult, right? It makes it easier because the government can act directly. So we are very active in supporting governance of state-owned enterprises. I think it's no secret to anyone that rules and regulations governing state-owned enterprises in transition countries are suboptimal. We actually did an analysis comparing SOE regulatory framework to what OECD considers to be the best practice, and the picture is not pretty. So that's one area. Now, the second area is, if you think about coal regions and closing coal mines, that obviously, the impact goes obviously beyond just the miners. It's the region itself and its neighboring regions. 2 weeks ago, I talked to the mayor of Zabrze, and she mentioned to me that luckily her city has the period of closing coal mines behind itself, they did experience very high unemployment at that time. That's behind them, but now they are bracing themselves for the impact from other regions that will have to go through this transition. So the question is, how do you create business opportunities? And we do it, for instance, by providing SME credit. We work with financial institutions in many countries, and these financial institutions extend SME credit on our behalf. Often this is credit targeting women entrepreneurs. The third part is you want to make it easier for firms to adjust. Now, we need to produce things in a different way. It is much easier for a large, profitable firm to undertake the necessary investment to adjust to low-carbon future. It's much more difficult for SME because of lack of funding. So we also support SME credit for green purposes as well.
Okay, great. I'd like to open the floor for questions because the whole session is 45 minutes long. We still have about 24 minutes. I'll come back in a bit, but we have one question here in front. I'd like to collect a couple of questions. If there are other questions, could you please just raise your hand? We have, I hope we have someone with a microphone who's coming around. Are there other questions, just so maybe we can collect them? Yeah, there's a second one in the second row, a third one in the third row. Perfect.
Thank you very much. My name is Martin Hoysig, I'm an MEP. And first remark, I think that with the whole just transition concept and the money that the union is putting into just transition, I think this is an unprecedented step because when in early 90s, lots of the old industries in our region fell, there was no just transition. And we managed. When the car industry in early 20th century came about and the entire horse carriage industry collapsed within 10 years, there was no just transition. So I want us to be aware that this is something where, and I'm not disputing it, I think it's really, really important, but I want us to be aware that this is something which is quite a bit of extra, not kind of a minimum safety net. And I think that we should be proud of it. But a specific question to Madam Javorčík in EBRD. I'm very happy to hear that EBRD is focusing now its lending on a climate-friendly project. I wonder to which extent it also extends to the loan facilities where you loan to the banks, which are then intermediaries. So which criteria you set up there? And second, whether you're planning to use the taxonomy of sustainable investments as one of the criteria, or possibly the screening criteria vis-a-vis climate, or there will be delegated act on the circular economy, there will be delegated act on biodiversity. So whether you're planning to use this instrument as something which will help you to kind of screen the projects that will require mandatory disclosure under the taxonomy regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. So a question for Beata. You'll register that. We're going to collect these three questions and then allow our panelists to answer. So in the second row, there was a question. Was it the gentleman there? Yes, I thought so. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Petr Kremsky, chair of the Economic Committee of Slovak Parliament. You mentioned two things, idea and mechanism. The idea is very nice and like it. All of us like clean, green world, like outside there, we can see. But the mechanism, I see a lot of greenwashing and a lot of hypocrisy in the green transition. First example, electricity production. In Germany, they stopped or are stopping, will stop soon, their nuclear power plants, and instead the electricity will be produced in gas power plants or in coal power plants. By this price of electricity, probably many of the coal power plants must be started again because the electricity will go through the sky otherwise. Second example, European Commission is pushing on forbidding of fossil cars, we can say. in 5 or 10 years. But the electric cars are mostly produced in China, the batteries are mostly produced in China, the technology and the knowledge is in China. And what we can see now in automotive industry is that some of the products are very problematic, and tens of thousands of cars are waiting somewhere on the parking place in the factory for one part or two parts, and you can wait for a car 8 months, 12 months, and soon probably we will be happy to produce any cars, to have some cars.
Okay, so I was just wondering, maybe you could go to a question.
That's the problem, and the carbon producing is in coal power plants, in industry, but we will forbid the fossil cars. So that's my idea. I would like to listen to your opinion about this.
Okay, so it's basically a question about, as you said at the beginning, hypocrisy in this whole enterprise and greenwashing, and maybe the lack of feasibility or lack of actually planning. Good. Maybe we can get a response to that as well. And in the third row here, the third question, and then we'll come back to the panel here.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Peter Balik from the Ministry of Investment, responsible for the implementation of the Just Transition Fund in Slovakia, which takes 459 million euro for our country, for two regions for sure, Upper Nitra, as has been mentioned, and the Košice region in the east. We are right now in the middle of negotiations regarding a third region, Banská Bystrica region. But the transformation potential is quite questionable in the region. Mainly because most of the heavy industry players in the Banská Bystrica region already underwent transformation in the past. So they invested a lot in new technologies. And that's why the European Commission is quite hesitant to support this region, even though the transition already happened before, but the impact is still there. So we are also confronting a lot of opinions from this particular region that we are talking right now about an unjust transition fund. Because the European Commission is quite hesitant to support this third region in Slovakia. So maybe a question on that, how to really persuade the Commission to make this particular region eligible one, even though the transformation has undergone there, but there are still remaining challenges. Maybe the next question would be related to the financing. We are very much confronted with high industries in Upper Nitra and in Košice region as well, mainly US Steel, which are quite hesitant to use financial instruments from the second and third pillar of the Just Transition mechanism. They are mostly interested in the grant mechanism, which is of course understandable, but maybe what is the case in other Western European countries? Is there appetite for financial instruments on the side of the large industries which really need to undergo the transition? So, thank you.
Thank you all. I'm hoping once we finish this round, we'll still have some space for some other questions. So please raise your hand. I'll acknowledge that. There's one already in the second row, another in the second row for this next round of questions, and over here in the second row. Very good. Okay, we'll come back to you first. We're going to field these questions. I'd like to start with you, Beata, because with Linda, rather, responding to what we just heard, since it's fresh and it applies to the region, and it's a very concrete question from a policymaker who's involved in this. The salient term coming out of that statement for me was the notion that there's an unjust transition, and curious how maybe the region can plug into this in a more constructive way.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick and maybe hit a couple of the points that were raised. I think it's a very interesting question, right? Unjust transition. I don't think the mechanism will ever be perfect, and who knows, in the future it might be revised and we might have to have much more financial support for a variety of decarbonization activities and for certain communities being hit hardest in certain industries. I think a big issue that you mentioned, is it better in the rest of the region or elsewhere? Well, actually, the V4 is not looking particularly great. Nobody likes loans. You also see that in the recovery and resilience case. It's predominantly give us a grant and then we'll see. That we need to change. We need to start thinking about how we develop our capital markets better, how we bundle different projects and go for scale, because often these investment tickets, as we call it in investing, are very small. So you need to figure out how you're going to improve the conditions there. In terms of why is there so much greenwashing, that's why we have the green taxonomy, right? The idea was to compare apples with apples, so we don't have these ridiculous situations where you see a lot of greenwashing. It's not easy to root it out completely. At least it starts setting some standard. It's ideally science-based. Of course, we have issues that we can discuss separately about the taxonomy. It's a big topic. But up until now, what we've had is what I call the low-hanging fruit approach, where you do the easy decarbonization. So electric car, easy. Put some solar panels and have green energy that you can then report in your sustainability report, easy. But I think what's also changing massively is the data space. And as we have more data, we try to gather more data, we have better technology to potentially also get not only self-reported data, but other types of data about different businesses. We should start getting a little bit better at actually finding what are companies doing and where the impact is. So there's amazing projects by Google and others that actually show a variety of different data that you can use for figuring out what is happening on the ground. And that is changing very rapidly, but of course these things take time. And in terms of the, you know, we had all these industrial revolutions before and people just got left behind. Well, let's be realistic. People are going to get left behind. That's just not going to change. We should be honest about that. But we are already leaving a lot of people behind in terms of inequality of opportunity, inequality of income, lack of convergence across the EU. But I think what this region can really bring to the table, again, in terms of the European Commission agenda, is actually talking about the social side, talking about the inequality, and pushing the fact that social is directly linked to climate. Because if you have opposition to green, if it's seen as biased, then it's going to derail the climate effort anyway. So it's an integral part. And many of you have heard the ESG mantra, so environmental, social, and governance criteria, that's going to save the world. No, it's not. But eventually it will, again, create more data and allow us to see what the linkages between the S and E are. Because at the moment, half of the things we're doing blindfolded.
So it sounds like very much still in a learning situation, but in a way we've been here before. The world has gone through different industrial revolutions. There have been technological advancements that have displaced the previous technologies, and with great disruption, social and economic disruption, but also opportunity, which I don't want to forget in this case, that there are opportunities here too. And from a business perspective, and I know we have many representatives of the business community here among us as well, also bankers and investors who are looking at this. It's important to keep that in mind, I would say. Nadia, would you care to comment, because this was particularly with regard to what's happening in this region and how it plugs into the just transition mechanism?
Well, I understand the remarks, and especially the region which is being discussed, the region of Banska Bystrica. I understand why they find it kind of not fair, but where we would like to see more support from the EU. And this is something what was not really mentioned by now in the discussion, is upskilling. So we must not forget that all these people that are going to leave the heavy industry because of the changes there, we must create job opportunities for them. And I think this is a big part where Just Transition Fund should help. So even if the decarbonization in the region happened, we could support the job opportunities for the people and create other areas where they can find interesting jobs. And there are here on GLOBSEC a lot of discussions about the Danube Tech Valley and so on. So I think there is a lot of space where we can improve the situation right now. And I'm personally very glad to see that it should be extended in the Slovakia, and it's not just the region of Horná Nitra. And in respect of this greenwashing, just one remark, I think I think it's very important that we don't forget on the purpose of the projects, because I really go a lot around the country to meet the potential customers, and sometimes I really hear funny stories. I mean, it's Saturday morning, so we can have one fun fact. So I know about one SME that they wanted to apply for the Just Transition money in the future, and they wanted to create a carp farm, you know, so it's
What kind of farms?
carp, you know, for the fish.
Oh, yeah, carp.
So,
yeah, sure.
yeah, so I think it's very important that we do smart solutions and low carbon solutions then from this money. So because then you don't have these ridiculous discussions. Okay, now the prices of energy, they are tremendously high. Let's start the coal factories again, because this is really what is happening, and we see this in more countries, and also not only in the Europe. So
I'm really glad you did mention upskilling. That's not something we've talked about. I mean, it's also kind of a strange term, but we're talking about, you know, training people and preparing them with new skills in order to make this transition from carbon-intensive industries into something greener, whatever that may be. But it's a large matrix of policies that need to come together in order to make this to make a just transition work in any serious way. Beata, would you care to comment on?
Absolutely. So there was a question whether we care about sustainability. So let me explain how we pick our projects. Right. So our projects, these are loans, so we need to follow the principle of sound banking, right? We want our money back. We want to be additional, meaning we want to ensure to the extent possible that this investment would not have happened without our involvement. And finally, and most importantly, we want our project to lead to some systemic change. We are in the business of systemic change. And that means that each project is quite rigorously evaluated in terms of change it brings, in terms of the impact it has. So it's not just about investing money, it's about making sure that there is some transition impact of what we do. So, for instance, whenever we invest in green projects, we calculate anticipated tons of CO2 emissions that can be saved. We work with capital markets. We try to help develop regulatory structure for new instruments. We are active in equity space. So we are, I would say, quite rigorous in the way we approach our projects. It's not just, you know, pushing money through the door. Now, on greenwashing, and just to sum up, you can think of us as impact investor, right? Because we have either impact on governance, or on green issues, or on equality of opportunities, or the level of competitiveness in the country, or resilience in the country. Greenwashing is obviously a difficult topic. We are active in green bonds, for instance, recently we issued first high-yield sustainability-linked bond in Southern Europe. So this is a bond issue. We participate in the issuance of this bond. It was issued by a Greek electricity producer, which committed itself to reducing CO2 emissions by 40% by 2023. And if they do not achieve the goal, their interest rate will go steeply up, right? So if you are an investor, or even a smaller investor, how do you ensure that they have stuck to this commitment? Well, you would hope that EBRD gives the seal of approval to this deal, and that we lend credibility to this financial instrument. And I think this role of organizations like ours in providing credibility, in giving the seal of approval is quite important, because it is a way of unlocking private financing that can flow to various green projects.
Okay, it's just we're kind of short, if you don't mind. I had promised 3 other people that they'd be able to ask questions. I would like to make that happen, if you don't mind. We had 3 questions in the second row. Just raise your hand again. The microphone will be brought to you, the gentleman first of all there, and then we'll come to you and then to you.
Mateusz Torakanji, sorry, EBRD. Could I ask you about the broader social impact of winners and new losers of transition? Because from my own experience as policymaker, I mean, coal miners will always be strong enough to make sure they will get the just transition themselves. But what about the consumers? What about the households that will be faced with more expensive fuel? And what are the winners and losers in a broader sense? It's not so much the mechanism, but the concept. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for being brief as well, because we only have 5 minutes, and I'd like to allow the panelists to respond. So if you could please just identify yourself and make a brief question.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrea Ferinčíková, and I work for the European Investment Bank, and happily to be involved with the Just Transition Mechanism.
Exactly.
So I had to come in also with maybe a small comment, because the EIB is indeed to be one of the main implementers of the Just Transition Mechanism across the EU, and especially, of course, the regions. Not only that we would be a main implementing partner for the second pillar, for the Invest EU, but more or less we will be the main financing partner for providing the third pillar. That would be the public lending facility. But a part of this, what I see really important and what has not been yet mentioned is the advisory. And this comes also back to the point that Linda was making, that there is a lack of capacity, because even though the regions or these stakeholders are trying to prepare the project pipeline, but they are mainly focused on how to spend the grants, how to basically allocate the first pillar. And none of them is really looking on the way how to really make the change, how to make the transition, and how to utilize maybe some also private capital into this transition. So here we are really putting a lot of emphasis on the advisory, and we are trying also to talk to them not to be really afraid to go ahead with the innovative way of financing. It's not only what kind of projects you will be financing, but the way how you are going to finance it. So here I believe that here is big momentum of changing this approach. And one just short question would be to panel is, what do you believe should be the legacy of the program? Because we are discussing different projects, different ideas. So what should be the legacy behind the transition? Should it be the new schools, new infrastructure, kind of like new mindset? So that would be the question. Thank you.
I hope we can still get to it, because I really appreciate a question from a practitioner who's very much involved in it. We only have 3 minutes left, and it's my job to make sure this thing ends on time. So if you could, please be brief.
And now you get another one from the EIB. I'm Gerd Weller, the head of office in Bratislava. I don't want to talk about the EIB is doing now. I want to talk of what I've been doing for the EIB in Lusatia, where we were financing the rehabilitation of the former GDR lignite area. And in my opinion, what really matters in the whole process is psychology. You have to take the people on board. I mean, it's nice to transform a lignite area into a touristic area now, what is now happening. But if you tell a 52-year, like I am, engineer, well, maybe you will be a waiter at a tourist resort in the future, because your job is just become redundant. So please don't forget to take the people on board who need to fill their fridges every day, despite if there is a job in lignite or not.
Thank you. That picks up very well on what Linda was saying about the importance of addressing inequality. We also heard the idea of the need to increase capacity for the advisory capacities. This needs to be improved. And we also heard concerns expressed about the general impact of the transition towards, or the greening of the economy. And again, in the German election just now, in an almost issue-free election, this was one of the issues that did actually make it onto the agenda, was discussed in some serious way. During the last minute and a half, could any of you quickly make a comment that might address these concerns were just mentioned?
In terms of who will be affected, I mean, it's actually quite wide-ranging, right? So we have well-defined groups such as coal miners, we have regions, which are dependent on heavy industry, and this heavy industry may become non-competitive with higher carbon prices. We have poorer households that will be facing much higher energy bills. And then we have this whole reallocation of market shares from firms that are investing, making adjustments to low carbon production, and they are increasing their market share at the expense of firms that are not making adjustments. So workers need to move. And then the question is, older workers, right? Will older workers be able to move? But to your question, what should be the...
Thank you. I'm afraid I need to bring in the other two, just to be fair. I hope you understand. Thank you. Linda?
I just think that in terms of who's going to lose and how do we look at who else is losing out and what is happening, I think that the social impact assessment is extremely important. There's already data and very good solid science emerging how to do that. How do you actually measure social impact? And I think that's going to be changing, and we need to integrate that because governments should be impact investors, right? You have a social contract to uphold. And the last thing, what should be the legacy? I think that the legacy should be the realization that you need contextualized just transition solutions per industry, per region, per country. And that's something that I think links to something called shades of green bonds, that each instrument needs to be different. So financing needs to also be different in each occasion. So we just need to stop thinking that one solution will fit all sizes.
Thank you. And final word, Nadia.
Okay, so I won't repeat what was said because I agree basically, but on financing, just a closing remark, I think it's very important. These are not just like grants, that the private money is really brought into the game, and it's a combination. It's a combination of the loan and the grants. This is very important that it's successful in the end of the day.
A warm round of applause for our three panelists, and thank you all for participating as you did. From here to a whole afternoon of talking about this, because there's a deep need to talk about the subject of just transition, mainly the concept, but also the mechanism. Thank you again, and I'm just going to quickly hand over to our next panel happening right now. Please stay with us, don't go anywhere. Václav Hudák is going to talk about, get a panel going on getting road and rail ready for mobility of tomorrow. Thank you all.